Why is it important for you to produce everything that you write?
So I can control it. Not that I'm a control freak, but the thing is that I have to make sure that I control the rights to my project, because not only would I benefit from owning my own content, but my sons would benefit and their children would benefit. You know, so that's very important for me, is for, you know, for when I'm gone, that my children and their children and their children are eating off or benefiting from the works that their grandfather, great grandfather put in. So I think that as filmmakers, we all should be aware that this is very important. We got to look down 50 years from now, that we want our grandchildren to say, okay, my granddaddy or my grandmother left me something that, you know, that I can be proud of. So that's why it's important for me to produce or control the content that I put out.
Was your relationship with your grandfather very strong? I mean, is that something that you remember and then you want to sort of emulate, or?
Well, on my mom's side, I didn't know my grandfather, and so it's tricky, because on my father's side, I didn't know my biological grandfather, but I knew the man who married my grandma, and I didn't know that he wasn't my real grandfather, because to me, as far as my biological grandfather, because to me he was there, and so we had a great relationship with my grandfather, and again, to me, you know, we didn't know that he wasn't our real grandfather. I mean, I didn't know. I'm sure my brothers and sisters probably, because I didn't care. But with my grandfather, we had a great relationship with him, you know.
So you always kind of remember that, and you want to be that to future generations.
Yeah. So I had a better relationship with my grandfather than my real father, and I didn't know on my mom's side, my grandfather passed before I was born, so I didn't know him at all.
So was he someone that would instill confidence in you and?
No, my grandfather? No, so I think my father, I think my mom says all the time, I remind her, out of all of her children, I remind her most of my father. My father passed away 2 years ago of cancer. Oh, sorry. But he was always, my father, every time I remember my father, he always did something for himself. He always worked for himself. And when he passed, he left farm for his children. So we have a farm in Michigan. So he left something for us, you know, that's why we have to, I tell my brothers and sisters, we have to keep this land, because he put a lot of work into this land. So I never remember my father ever working for anyone. He always worked for himself, you know. So I think I got a lot of that from him, is the fact that, you know, I had to work for myself, you know. So my father, even though he wasn't technically in my life, like, you know, but he was a great influence on me as far as doing what I needed to do as a entrepreneur and as a businessman and as a filmmaker. He was a great influence. He was a great influence. Yeah.
So even though maybe you didn't see him get up at 4 in the morning or wherever it was, you just knew that he had that work ethic in him. Obviously, if he's
he was his own man. Like my father was like, he was his own. He didn't, you know, he was an independent man. You know, he did, I don't know what kind of work he did, but I know that he always, you know, he worked. He did for himself. You know, he always had a beautiful home. He always you know, he always drove a nice car. But I never remember him ever going to work or working for someone. He always worked for himself. And I asked my mother, I was like, what did he do? You know, what did he do, you know, for a living? So, you know, my father did his thing, but the independence that he had, the freedom that he had, is what I admired most about him. You know, he could have easily worked for the post office or something like that. You know, he went to the military. He was in the Air Force. So, you know, those jobs, you know, he easily came out and worked a job, but he's like, you know, I'm going to be an independent man. I'm going to have my freedom, and that's what I admire most about my father, is the fact that, you know, and that I think taught me a lot just from looking afar off, you know, to want to do something for myself. Yeah.
It's interesting when we look back on our lives and see, like, oh yeah, like this person that I saw, whether I had a good relationship or whatever it was, or even if I knew them well, that I wanted to emulate something about them that I really admired, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember my mom and my father divorced when I was 7 years old. So when they divorced, of course, you know, you want, like, my father was like, you know, he was in my life and I remember because he had a drinking problem too. But I remember I was about 6 years old or 7 years old the day he stopped drinking. I know exactly where we were at. The last time I ever saw him get drunk again. So we were walking through an alley, and I clearly remember I was like 7, walking through an alley, and we went to the liquor store. He bought some liquor, and then walking through the alley like in Inglewood, and he just threw the bottle down, and I've never seen him ever take a drink after that. And so when they divorced, my parents divorced, again, you know, that was my father, and I was pretty upset, you know, I was pretty mad at him. And it was, I was in about 6th grade, and I had wrote him this long letter as far as my, you know, as far as how I'm disappointed, and, you know, you left me and you were not in my life. And so he came over, and, you know, we had a conversation, you know, I was like, you know, he came over, had a conversation, and so, you know, but after that time, like, you know, my father is, you know, he's a, you know, I admire him so much, you know, even though he wasn't, you know, he wasn't there with me growing up a lot, you know, but just seeing his freedom, his independence is you know, is why I always say, you know, and you know, you know, I love him for that. Yeah.
I'm getting teary-eyed.
And that made me,
that made me cry here.
And that made me, I think that has a lot to do with me. And it's interesting because when I started making movies, he was proud. Yeah, he would call the people, my son, you know, he was very proud of that. So, you know, and my sister says, she's like, because my sister and my father are very close. They were very close, like very close. But I think that because he was so proud of me making movies, it's like, she was like, he always boasting about you making movies and stuff like that. But, you know, it's a great thing. Yeah, my father is, yeah.
All right. I'm gonna have to do a mascara check here.
Yeah.